No other questions? Besides, how do I wake up this morning?
I have a question about, what do you think about colostrum as an immune enhancer as opposed to using botanicals?
Oh, so the question is, what do I think about colostrum? I used it for many years in clinical practice. Just the suppliers I've been working with lately, over the last, I could probably say 5 to 10 years, haven't had it available, and therefore I haven't used it. I have found that the goat and sheep colostrum seemed to be better than the cow colostrum with the people I was working with. I found it to be extremely beneficial. We certainly used it in lots of our patients that are being immune compromised. For example, HIV, or someone who had cancer, or somebody who had gone into the second or third stage of autoimmune disease, whereas their system had kind of collapsed after the autoimmune disease. It does really seem to give some kind of archetypical memory. Obviously, the immune system with the colostrum, just to remind you, for people who are not quite sure what that is, colostrum is the first, 3 to 7 days of milk produced in lactation. So really what the mother is doing is actually giving large amounts of the immune system to the child at that point in time. So these are the immune system situations that have not come up during the gestation period, and it might have even been compromised a little bit in the labor stage, the paturation stage. So the most important time to breastfeed is for the literal 3 to 7 days after, even if a woman doesn't breastfeed any other time, or even if a woman can't breastfeed because there's problems with the child or whatever, we're strongly suggesting she should breast pump for at least that week, freeze it, and give it to the child later. Okay? So that's her own personal innate immune cells, or innate immune blueprints to be able to work with the child. Of course, if you're using a cows or a sheep or a goat, it's not the same. But it seems to stimulate the whole process quite well. And so we've had very good success. But that's not the real question. The real question that you asked was, what's better, botanicals and or the colostrum? And I'd have to say both. So I've often used the colostrum along with, when I say often, I haven't used it that much for, I'm suggesting 5 years, simply because the suppliers haven't had it that I've normally worked with in the past, or I haven't noticed it. But it found very good significance, especially in the HIV area, chronic fatigue syndrome area, and cancer area. So I'd have to give 2 thumbs up with it. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't use the echinaceas of the world, the reishi of the world, the astragalus of the world along with. Because sometimes you need an awful lot. At the very, very least, it's an extremely good tonic. That's a good, strong, healthy food. Meaning that it appears to strengthen the person's body, even if it wasn't for that function. Yes?
What are your thoughts on colostrum as it pertains to like human growth hormone, or just promoting growth and building?
Okay, and so the question is, what do I think about colostrum for building the body as a human growth hormone? I have not seen any success in that area. Because I haven't seen any success doesn't mean that it doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. I just realized I had the wrong one here. I've certainly over the years had several patients that have literally displayed lack of growth. And using colostrum didn't seem to be able to help them significantly. I know it's being touted to that. But in some of these people we've even got human growth hormone, and it wasn't as active as we'd like it to be either, even though it is readily available, certainly through the internet, even though it's illegal in Canada to sell. So I can't really say directly if it's the colostrum that's the issue or the individuals we've worked with. the issue, or a combination. It just didn't work in that matrix or that combination there. To use it to bulk up as a bodybuilder, or to use it to bulk up, make a person 3 inches taller or whatever, I would say that's kind of chasing smoke. Will it work in that area? Probably not, but I don't have good enough evidence, even though I've tried to a degree with patients that have requested that. But I can say it's a superfood, and I can say it's a tonic, and that's beneficial in those situations anyway. So I don't see any harm in trying, as it were. Any other questions? I'm going to, just before we start today, go some of the things that have been in the news in the last week that are kind of really interesting. Not directly herbal, but in this case, vitamin-wise. Last Wednesday, Ontario officially decided for sure they're not going to test for vitamin D deficiency anymore. They talked about it last year. The reasons is last winter there was so many doctors that asked for vitamin D deficiency tests that it was the largest drain on the Medicare costs for lab tests in Ontario. And it's partly because of the way they test with it. It's $50 a test. It's cheaper to test for cholesterol and a whole bunch of other things, do a whole panel, than it was for vitamin D itself. That was part one of that. Part two of it, they found at least 95% of the people they tested didn't have enough vitamin D. So they just figured, since vitamin D is so cheap, give everyone vitamin D. Okay, so again, a week ago, they've decided not to test for it anymore. Or, that's not true. If a person wants to be tested for vitamin D, they have to pay for it. It's not covered under Medicare systems because it was taxing to them. On Friday, there was a congress that's going on for a long period of time of looking at daily minimum requirements of vitamins. And they've actually taken the daily minimum requirement of vitamin D and raised it from 200 IUs up to 600 IUs, meaning they tripled it, which is very significant and very bold. They didn't want to. They did realize that there was an awful lot of Americans, as the United States. And by the way, on Monday, Canada mirrored it. So whatever we're saying about the United States in this case, and when I say that, there were Canadians at the table. It was an international board, and so this is an international thing. So this week, the Canadians have also changed it from the 200 to 600. But what they did do is say they worried about high doses of vitamin D toxicity, because there are problems with high doses of vitamin D in some people, but we're talking really high doses. Okay, we're not talking. But they did go on to say that they considered it completely safe for North Americans, especially Canadians and or people that didn't have access to the sun all winter long, to have at least 4,000. So they've given a stamp of approval now for the 4,000, which they've never done before. They were actually, even officially a couple of weeks ago, suggesting anything over 1,000 could be toxic. Even though there is solid evidence the opposite is true. They don't believe most of the studies that have been out there on this, even though there are animal studies, etc., and there are some human studies. But most of the human studies are epidemiological, meaning they've compared population bases that live in the sun compared to population bases that don't live in the sun, and they found lots of flaws in that in their own minds, so they wouldn't want to use that. And there hasn't been suitable enough studies done on large enough numbers of people to increase it anymore. That's a fairly significant departure, though, because even 3 weeks ago, I was on a government panel, and they decided not to raise the level of vitamin D, even though they found there was suitable evidence to raise it. And the major reason is it was too hard in government agencies to do it. Really what that translates to be, too hard for government agencies to do it because of the law, is they didn't want to be the first country to do it. They wanted to wait for a bigger country to do it, and then they'd follow suit. So, even though the recommendations came up from the NHP 2 weeks ago, they now have to change what it is. Now, I know that's not directly botanical, But you've heard me say in many lectures that I'm suggesting that people in the winter in a northern hemisphere like this, and I'm saying above the 40th parallel, and we're 51 here, should in the winter take somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000, good average being 4,000 daily. We seem to be able to create a reserve of about 1.5 months. So we don't, if you're out in the sun a lot in the summer, you really don't have to start looking at that until, well, mid-September through to mid-October typically. But it doesn't hurt. What a lot of people are calling the sunshine vitamin not only helps your immune system, there's a lot of epidemiological evidence at least that it prevents large numbers of cancers. Colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, etc. So the whole cancer story seems to be pretty rich here. It also is really good for depression, moods, and of course the most obvious one of all is bone density. It's been shown, especially things like osteoporosis, that vitamin D3 particularly, but any vitamin D, is more beneficial than estrogen replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy, or any other kind of phenomenon like that to be able to help for bone density. It's better than any botanical too. And we're going to talk about a few botanicals today that have worked along those lines, but I'd have to say right now the science is leaning more towards the vitamin D even better than the botanicals. There's nothing wrong with using them both together.